Southwest Airlines revolutionized air travel with low fares, quick turnarounds, and a no-frills approach that changed the industry forever. But its journey wasn't always smooth. Legal battles, economic downturns, and fierce competition nearly grounded it even before it took off. So how did Southwest go from a scrappy Texas airline to the largest domestic carrier in the US? Well, welcome back to A Brief History, a series where I look into the history of the most influential airlines and airplanes in aviation history. In this episode, we're taking a look at a carrier that has been under a lot of heat recently, Southwest Airlines. Since the history of Southwest is so intricate, this will be an extra-length edition of A Brief History. All these episodes are edited down into smaller pieces you can find on my channel. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Southwest's story begins not in a boardroom, but in a San Antonio hotel bar in 1966. Businessman Roland King and his lawyer, Herbkelleher, sat down for drinks to discuss an idea that could change air travel. King pulled out a cocktail napkin and sketched a simple triangle representing a plan to connect three Texas cities, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, with low-cost, frequent flights. The concept was simple but revolutionary. By operating solely within Texas, the airline could bypass strict federal regulations, giving it the freedom to set its own fares and schedules. The following year, the two men incorporated their airline as Southwest Air Company, determined to bring affordable air travel to Texans. But before they could even get off the ground, the major airlines took notice, and they weren't happy. Braniff, Continental, and Trans-Texas Airlines launched a legal battle to stop Southwest before its first flight, arguing that Texas didn't need another airline. What followed was a drawn-out court fight that lasted over 2 years, nearly bankrupting the fledgling company before it even had the chance to take off. Finally, in May of 1970, the Texas Supreme Court ruled in Southwest's favor, and by the end of the year, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, securing Southwest's right to fly. But the legal battle had taken a toll. With little money left and just 3 Boeing 737s to its name, the airline had to get creative to survive. From its earliest days, Southwest operated differently, using quick turnarounds, a single aircraft type, and a fun, customer-friendly culture to stand out. With the legal battles finally behind them, Southwest Airlines was ready to take off, but first, they needed a leader to guide them forward. In January of 1971, they brought in Lamar Muse as president and CEO. Muse wasn't new to the airline industry. A Texas native, he had worked at 5 different airlines and even led 2 of them as CEO. With him at the helm, the airline had a fighting chance. One of Muse's first moves was to officially rename the company Southwest Airlines and relocate its headquarters to Dallas. But there was still one major problem: money. The legal fights had drained Southwest's funds, leaving them scrambling to secure financing. Muse managed to raise $1.25 million, a big chunk coming from Texas oil man Wesley West. With cash in hand, it was time to build an airline. To get operations off the ground, Southwest struck a deal with Boeing to buy 3 undelivered 737-200s at a bargain price, hiring pilots from the recently defunct Purdue Airlines and using operation manuals borrowed from Pacific Southwest, or PSA. In fact, PSA played a huge role in shaping Southwest's early business model, even training some of its flight attendants. The inspiration was obvious. PSA had built a successful low-cost airline in California, and Southwest wasn't shy about copying what worked. Muse himself admitted, "We don't mind being copycats of an operation like that." By early June 1971, Southwest was able to raise an additional $7 million through an initial public offering. Investors, especially those in California familiar with PSA's success, saw the potential. But Southwest wasn't just borrowing business strategies. It also adopted some of PSA's marketing tactics. In the early days, the airline played into the era's culture by emphasizing its flight attendants' looks, even running an ad addressed to actress Raquel Welch, asking for applications for women who were like her. Over 1,200 applied, including Muse's own daughter. On June 18, 1971, Southwest Airlines officially took to the skies. It launched with 2 routes, Dallas to Houston and Dallas to San Antonio, running a total of 18 flights per week. But just as it started flying, the competition was not finished trying to bring Southwest down. Braniff and Texas International claimed Southwest was engaging in interstate commerce and should be regulated by the Federal Civil Aeronautics Board. When that didn't work, they sued again. The appeals court ultimately rejected their arguments in 1972, calling the never-ending lawsuits undue harassment. But the attacks didn't stop there. Texas International and Braniff took their fight beyond the courtroom, using every trick in the book, even some illegal ones, to block Southwest's success. This harassment became so aggressive that both airlines ended up facing federal antitrust charges. Braniff entered a nolo contendere plea, with Texas International pleading guilty. By the end of 1971, Southwest had lost $3.8 million. The following year, the airline was still in the red, losing another $1.6 million. If something didn't change, Southwest wouldn't last for much longer. That's when they started thinking differently. Instead of just targeting business travelers, they found a new way to fill their planes: off-peak flights. It started almost by accident. Southwest had to reposition an aircraft on Friday nights and decided to sell seats at a discount price. Even without advertising, the flight became wildly popular. Seeing the opportunity, Southwest leaned into this strategy, introducing low-cost night and weekend fares. These fares, branded as pleasure fares, were much cheaper than the standard executive fares, and they worked. More passengers meant fuller planes, and fuller planes meant lower cost per seat. But even that wasn't enough. By mid-1972, Southwest had to make a tough call. It sold its fourth 737. On the surface, that seemed like a step backward. But with only 3 planes left, the airline had to get creative to keep its hourly service running. The solution? Faster turnarounds. Southwest's original turnaround time was 25 minutes, which was already fast for the industry. But to make the schedule work with just 3 planes, they had to cut that down to just 10 minutes. It was a massive challenge, but the operations team pulled it off, keeping planes in the air longer and reducing costs. That legendary fast turnaround became a core part of Southwest's business model for decades to come. Then came another key move: shifting flights from Houston Intercontinental to the older Hobby Airport. Hobby was closer to downtown, making it more convenient for travelers flying in from Dallas, who made up over half of Southwest passengers at the time. The transition wasn't exactly smooth. The first flights even disturbed bats living in the abandoned terminal, but the switch paid off. While other airlines made a half-hearted attempt to compete at Hobby, Southwest quickly turned it into a stronghold, giving the airline a lasting edge in the Houston market. By 1973, all these challenges started to pay off. While revenue per passenger was actually down, Southwest had driven its costs even lower. The airline posted its first ever profit, $175,000. More importantly, passenger numbers were surging, up to 75% over the previous year, and revenue per trip had climbed 53%. With the business finally stabilizing, Southwest placed an order for other aircraft. That small profit in 1973 marked a turning point. The airline had figured out how to make its low-cost model work, and from that point forward, Southwest wouldn't post another annual loss for nearly 50 years until the COVID-19 pandemic brought the airline industry to a standstill in 2020. By the mid-1970s, Southwest had found its footing. But just as things were starting to look up, another battle was brewing, this time over Southwest and where it could actually fly. In January of 1974, Dallas-Fort Worth Regional Airport, or what we now know as DFW, officially opened for commercial flights. Before the airport was built, all the major airlines serving the Dallas area had agreed to move their operations there, and both the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth had promised that no other airport in the region would allow commercial service. The goal was simple: consolidate airline traffic at DFW and shut down competition at smaller airports like Lovefield. There was just one problem. Southwest Airlines never agreed to this. The deal had been made before Southwest even existed, and it was an agreement between the airlines and the Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB. But Southwest wasn't regulated by the CAB. It was just an intrastate carrier overseen by the Texas Aeronautics Commission, and the TAC had given Southwest permission to fly out of Lovefield. That wasn't the only loophole. Lovefield had received federal funding, which meant it legally couldn't discriminate against any airline that wanted to use it. So when Southwest announced in 1971 that it had no plans to move to DFW, arguing that Lovefield was more convenient and had shorter taxi times, Dallas and Fort Worth took them to court. What followed was a 5-year legal battle over Southwest's right to stay at Love Field. The case dragged through the courts, but Southwest kept winning. In 1973, a federal district court ruled in the airline's favor, and by 1977, a federal appeals court had had enough, declaring, "This is the 8th time in 3 years that a federal court has refused to support the eviction of Southwest Airlines from Love Field." By 1973, Southwest Airlines was ready to expand beyond its original 3-city network. The first target, Harlingen, a city in Texas's Rio Grande Valley. CEO Lamar Muse saw an opportunity. Not only was the region underserved, but adding Harlingen would also allow for convenient one-stop connections to Dallas via Houston. Southwest applied to the TAC for approval, but as always, the competitors weren't going to make things easy. Texas International Airlines, the dominant carrier in the region, immediately challenged the request in court. But then, in 1975, Texas International's pilots went on strike, leaving a gap in the service. The TAC stepped in, granting Southwest emergency approval to start flying to Harlingen. Southwest didn't hesitate. Over a single weekend, the airline put everything in place and launched flights immediately. For over a year and a half, the legal battle continued, but by the time the case was finally settled in October of 1976, Southwest had already established itself at Harlingen. That same month, the TAC approved 5 more Texas cities: Austin, Corpus Christi, El Paso, Lubbock, and Midland. This time, instead of dragging things through the courts, competitors could only petition the TAC to reconsider, requests that were quickly denied. By January of 1977, Southwest was free to expand. And expand it did. The airline wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. By mid-1976, Southwest held a staggering 73% market share on its 4 existing routes. The Dallas to Houston corridor alone had skyrocketed from the 30th busiest air route in the United States to the 9th, thanks to Southwest's low fares and frequent service. The airline was forcing even larger federally regulated carriers out of its market. By the end of 1978, Southwest was flying 13 aircraft to 9 Texas cities, posting an industry-leading 26% operating margin. A big part of that success? Its legendary 10-minute turnarounds. In fact, Southwest's 1978 annual report made it clear. If turnarounds slowed from 10 minutes to 20, the airline would have needed 2 extra planes just to keep up with demand. After the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978, Southwest was ready to expand beyond Texas. The airline announced plans to start interstate service in 1979 with flights to New Orleans, and federal regulators quickly approved. But not everyone was on board. Officials in Fort Worth, along with major airlines like American, now headquartered in the city, were worried that a thriving Love Field would take business away from the new DFW airport. Determined to protect DFW, Texas Congressman Jim Wright pushed through an amendment to the International Air Transportation Act of 1979, known as the Wright Amendment. The law placed strict limits on flights from Love Field. Airlines could only fly to Texas and its 4 neighboring states: Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Flights beyond those states were only allowed on planes with 56 seats or fewer, effectively blocking mainline jets. And airlines couldn't sell connecting tickets beyond the 5-state region. At first, the restrictions didn't impact Southwest since all of its routes fit within the new limits. But instead of backing down, Southwest used the Wright Amendment to its advantage, offering low fares to smaller airports in the region, while legacy carriers charged sky-high prices. By 1979, Southwest had grown to 11 Texas cities and launched its first out-of-state route, Houston to New Orleans. In 1984, Southwest made a big move. It became the launch customer for the Boeing 737-300. On November 30th, the airline took delivery of its first one, naming it Kitty Hawk. Over the years, Southwest would become the largest operator of the 737-300, a workhorse that helped fuel its expansion. But while the fleet was growing, Southwest still had to navigate the restrictions of the Wright Amendment. In 1985, Dallas, Fort Worth, and DFW Airport tried to block Continental Airlines from operating at Love Field, arguing that its ability to sell connecting tickets violated the law. However, the U.S. Department of Transportation ruled that as long as airlines weren't actively promoting connections, passengers could book separate tickets to reach their destinations. This loophole worked in Southwest's favor. Savvy travelers could fly from Dallas to a nearby state and then book a separate ticket to any city Southwest served, bypassing the restrictions. That same year, Southwest made a bold acquisition, buying struggling carrier Muse Air for $60.5 million. It rebranded the airline as Transtar, running it as a separate operation. But after a fierce fare war with Frank Lorenzo's Texas Air, Southwest cut its losses, selling Transtar's assets back to Lorenzo in 1987. As Southwest continued to expand, so did its headquarters. In 1990, the airline moved into a new $15 million facility near Lovefield, growing it further in 1995 and again in 1996 with a $30 million expansion. That included a new pilot training center and additional parking, bringing Southwest's total leasehold at Lovefield to 24 acres. The airline also found creative ways to cut costs. In 1990, Southwest registered its planes in Houston to take advantage of tax laws while keeping its headquarters in Dallas, and in 1993, it acquired Morris Air, a Salt Lake City-based carrier, for $134 million. Morris Air was founded in 1984 by June Morris, who had already made waves in the travel industry with her travel agency Morris Travel. Modeled after Southwest Airlines itself, Morris Air pioneered budget-friendly flights across the West Coast, Hawaii, and Alaska. It became known for its innovative approach, including the introduction of e-tickets, an industry first. By 1993, it operated 1,000 weekly flights to 28 destinations. In 1994, Southwest acquired Morris Air, expanding its network and adopting its ticketless travel system. Morris joined Southwest's board of directors, solidifying her legacy in aviation history. This move expanded Southwest's network into the Pacific Northwest, and one of Morris Air's founders, David Neeleman, briefly worked with Southwest before going on to start WestJet and JetBlue, two future competitors. In 1995, Southwest launched its first website, iflyswa.com, later becoming southwest.com. By 2006, 70% of all flight bookings came through the site, making it the #1 airline website in terms of online revenue. Another key to Southwest's success? Fuel hedging. The airline made strategic bets on fuel prices, insulating itself from volatility and giving it a huge cost advantage over competitors. While some analysts debated whether it was speculation rather than risk management, there was no arguing with the results. Southwest's fuel strategy helped keep it profitable, even when other airlines struggled. By 1997, Southwest had invested $47 million expanding its Lovefield facilities. That same year, the airline made its first international partnership, teaming up with Iceland Air to offer joint fares and coordinated schedules connecting U.S. travelers to Europe via Baltimore. By the mid-1990s, some airlines were looking for ways to work around the Wright Amendment. One of them was Legend Airlines, a startup that proposed long-haul flights from Lovefield using McDonnell Douglas DC-9s, modified with just 56 seats to comply with the law. But in 1996, the U.S. Department of Transportation ruled that the restriction applied to the aircraft's original design capacity, not just the number of seats installed. That decision stalled Legend's plans, prompting them to push for a change in the law. With the help of Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, Legend backed a new amendment that Congress passed in 1997. The Shelby Amendment allowed unrestricted flights to Alabama, Kansas, and Mississippi, while also permitting nationwide flights on aircraft reconfigured to 56 seats. Southwest, however, didn't see enough demand to expand into these new states. But others did. Continental Express launched flights from Lovefield to Houston in 1998 with plans for interstate service once regulations allowed. By April 5, 2000, Legend Airlines finally began its long-haul operations. Soon, American, Continental Express, and Delta's regional partner Atlantic Southeast Airlines followed suit. But Southwest, which didn't operate a 56-seat aircraft, was left out. The very loophole the Legend fought for had worked against Southwest. By 2004, though, Southwest was ready to fight back. The airline began lobbying for a full repeal of the Wright Amendment. A year later, Congress made its first change, adding Missouri to the list of permitted states, allowing Southwest to launch flights to St. Louis and Kansas City in December 2005. Then, in June 2006, Southwest, Dallas, Fort Worth, DFW airports, and American Airlines struck a deal. The Wright Amendment would be repealed, but Lovefield's gates would be permanently capped at 20. Southwest and American would get preferential leases on the remaining gates. Until 2025, all international flights in the Dallas-Fort Worth area would operate exclusively from DFW Airport. And if Southwest or any partner airline flew from another airport within 80 miles of Love Field, Southwest would have to give up gates at Love Field. Congress passed the bill on September 29, 2006, and President George W. Bush signed it into law on October 13th. Just 3 days later, Southwest started selling tickets under the new law, which immediately eliminated restrictions on through ticketing and promised nationwide service within 8 years. By 2014, Love Field's gates reshuffled again. American had to give up 2 gates as a part of its merger with U.S. Airways, and Virgin America took over the lease. Then, on October 13, 2014, the Wright Amendment finally came to an end. On March 5, 2000, Southwest Airlines Flight 1455, a Boeing 737-300, overran the runway while landing at Burbank Airport in California. The aircraft skidded across the street and came to a stop at a Chevron gas station. Out of 137 passengers and 5 crew members, 2 passengers suffered serious injuries, while the captain and 41 others sustained minor injuries. The plane itself was badly damaged and later written off, making this the first major accident in Southwest's 29-year history. Investigators attributed the incident primarily to pilot error, as the aircraft landed at an excessive speed, with air traffic control mistakes also cited as a contributing factor. In January of 2007, Southwest ended its codeshare agreement with Iceland Air after the airline discontinued its Baltimore to Keflavik route. By 2008, Southwest was focusing on both operational improvements and strategic expansion. The airline partnered with Pratt & Whitney to introduce the EcoPower water pressure washing system, which helped clean engine turbine blades while aircraft were parked at the gate. This system was estimated to improve fuel efficiency by 1.9%. That same year, Southwest purchased assets from the bankrupt ATA Airlines for $7.5 million, primarily to gain ATA's operating certificate and landing slots at New York's LaGuardia Airport. While there was speculation that former ATA employees might be offered positions, the deal ultimately did not include aircraft, facilities, or direct employee transfers. When ATA ceased operations in April 2008, it also ended its codeshare agreement with Southwest, which had provided over 70 weekly flights to Hawaii from Southwest focus cities. However, 2008 also brought serious regulatory challenges. In March, FAA inspectors reported that Southwest had allowed 117 aircraft to fly without required safety inspections, in some cases up to 30 months past their deadline. The FAA claimed that thousands of passengers had flown on aircraft deemed unsafe by federal standards. As a result, Southwest voluntarily grounded 44 aircraft for further inspection. The airline faced a $10.2 million fine, and reports suggested that FAA officials may have overlooked the violations to avoid disrupting Southwest's operations. After a year of negotiations, Southwest agreed to pay a reduced fine of $7.5 million in 2009 with a 2-year deadline for the payment. During this period, Southwest also pursued new codeshare partnerships and acquisition opportunities. In July 2008, the airline announced a codeshare agreement with WestJet, but economic conditions led to its cancellation in April of 2010. In November 2008, Southwest signed a codeshare deal with Mexican low-cost carrier Volaris, allowing Southwest to sell tickets on Volaris flights. In July 2009, Southwest bid $113.6 million to acquire Frontier Airlines, planning to operate it separately before integrating it into its all-Boeing 737 fleet. However, after losing the initial bid to Republic Airways Holdings, Southwest chose not to pursue arbitration with pilots' unions and withdrew from the deal. In August of 2009, the FAA launched another investigation into Southwest, this time for installing unapproved parts on about 10% of its fleet. While the FAA determined the parts did not pose an immediate safety risk, Southwest was given until December 24, 2009 to replace them with FAA-approved components. They announced their anticipation to acquire AirTran Airways on September 27, 2010, and received final approval from the U.S. Department of Justice on April 27, 2011. The deal was completed on May 2, 2011, when Southwest purchased all outstanding stock, the corporate identity, and operating assets of AirTran Holdings Incorporated, the parent company of AirTran Airways. The transaction was valued at $3.2 billion, with an estimated $500 million in integration costs and expected annual cost synergies of $400 million. The acquisition provided Southwest with major strategic advantages, including access to Atlanta, an expanded international presence, and adding additional landing spots in New York's LaGuardia and Washington's Reagan airports. On March 1, 2012, Southwest secured a single operating certificate from the FAA, but full integration was not completed until AirTran's final flight on December 28, 2014. To manage the transition, Southwest created Guadalupe Holdings, a wholly owned subsidiary to oversee AirTran's operations and assets. Southwest's labor groups waived contractual scope clauses pending successful negotiations on seniority integration. The transition process involved gradually shifting AirTran's aircraft, routes, and employees to Southwest until full integration was achieved. Through the acquisition, Southwest added 25 new destinations, including several Caribbean cities and Boston, Massachusetts, which had been the largest U.S. city not served by Southwest at the time. Unlike AirTran, which operated banked flights in Atlanta, Southwest announced on October 10, 2011 that it would move away from this scheduling model. On February 13, 2013, Southwest and AirTran began code sharing, which allowed customers to book shared itineraries between the two airlines. The process started on January 26, 2013, with 5 markets and expanded to 39 on February 25, 2013. By April 2013, shared itineraries covered all Southwest and AirTran destinations, both domestic and international. The final step in integration was completed on December 29, 2014, when AirTran officially ceased operations, making Southwest the sole surviving brand. On December 13, 2011, Southwest became the launch customer for the Boeing 737 MAX, placing a firm order for 150 aircraft. The airline received its first 737 MAX on August 29, 2017, and began revenue service on October 1, 2017. In January of 2012, Southwest expressed interest in expanding into Mexico and South America from Houston's William P. Hobby Airport. On May 30, 2012, Houston City Council approved the request, with Southwest committing at least $100 million to fund the airport's expansion, including 5 new gates and a customs facility. After 2 years of construction, international service from Hobby began in October of 2015. Southwest introduced the Boeing 737-800 into its fleet on April 11, 2012, increasing passenger capacity from 143 to 175 seats compared to its 737-700s. The first 737-800 was named Warrior 1 in honor of Southwest's employees' warrior spirit. On February 22, 2013, Southwest ended its codeshare agreement with Mexican airline Volaris. Industry analysts attributed the decision to AirTran's expansion into more Mexican markets, making the agreement unnecessary. On May 5, 2014, Southwest announced plans to replace its domestic reservation system with a new system from Amadeus IT Group, which was already being used for its international reservations. When Southwest set out to redesign its livery in 2013, the goal was clear: go bold or don't go at all. With over a decade since the introduction of Canyon Blue, the airline was ready for a refresh, one that celebrated its growth, the acquisition of AirTran, and the upcoming repeal of the Wright Amendment. The challenge? Creating a design that was both visually striking and deeply meaningful. The result was a livery dominated by bold blue, accented with sunrise yellow and warm red, each color chosen to symbolize Southwest's values: exploration, service, and passion. A new Summit Silver stripe honored the airline's loyal customers, while the most significant addition was the heart logo, subtly placed on the aircraft's belly and near the main cabin door, representing Southwest's authenticity and care. The new look debuted in 2014 with a dramatic unveiling, reinforcing that Southwest wasn't changing, just evolving. The heart, now a core part of the brand, perfectly reflected the airline's mission to put people first, both in the skies and on the ground. On October 13, 2014, the Wright Amendment was officially repealed, allowing the airline to expand beyond previously restricted routes from Dallas-Lovefield. Through 2014, Southwest grew its presence at Reagan National Airport in D.C. and New York's LaGuardia Airport by acquiring slots from the American Airlines and U.S. Airways merger. And on June 16, 2016, Southwest received government approval to begin flights to Cuba, becoming one of 6 airlines selected by the U.S. Department of Transportation. The airline launched routes from Fort Lauderdale to Varadero and Santa Clara, Cuba. A tragic event occurred on April 17, 2018, when Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 suffered an engine failure mid-flight between New York and Dallas. The explosion caused shrapnel to puncture a window, leading to a rapid decompression. A passenger was partially pulled out of the aircraft before others managed to bring her back inside, but she ultimately succumbed to her injuries. That incident marked the first in-flight fatality due to an accident in Southwest's history. On March 13, 2019, the FAA grounded all Boeing 737 MAX aircraft following safety concerns linked to the crashes of Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. At the time, the MAX 8 made up about 5% of Southwest's fleet. The airline offered rebooking options for passengers on affected flights without additional fees. By October 17, 2019, Southwest anticipated the MAX would remain grounded until at least February 8, 2020, forcing the airline to cancel around 175 flights per weekday. The COVID-19 pandemic had a severe impact on Southwest beginning of March of 2020 as U.S. air travel dropped by 92% compared to the previous year. This led Southwest to cancel 1,500 daily flights, accounting for about 40% of its schedule. By the end of March, the airline had stored 50 Boeing 737-300s in California, in addition to its 34 grounded 737 MAX aircraft. As demand remained low, Southwest suspended nearly 50% of its scheduled flights through June 27th. To weather the crisis, Southwest finalized a deal on April 14th to receive $2.3 billion in grants and a $1 billion low-interest loan as a part of a congressional relief funding. While the airline initially cut fewer flights than competitors, making it the world's largest airline by seat capacity in April 2020, financial struggles continued. By April 28th, Southwest had parked 350 of its 742 aircraft, delayed upcoming 737 MAX deliveries, and reported daily losses of at least $30 million. By July 2020, about one-third of Southwest's workforce expressed interest in taking early retirement or long-term leave, and the airline launched voluntary separation and extended time off programs, with over 16,800 employees enrolling. To prevent furloughs, CEO Gary Kelly announced pay cuts for non-union employees and senior management, while also negotiating with unions for similar measures. However, union leaders opposed the cuts. On November 6, 2020, the airline continued to suffer pandemic-related losses. Southwest issued its first-ever WARN Act notices to 42 employees, warning of potential furloughs. On November 18th, an additional 402 WARN notices were sent to mechanics. However, on December 27, 2020, Congress passed the Consolidated Appropriations Act, providing $15 billion in airline aid. As a result, Southwest rescinded all furlough notices and pay cuts. Amid industry disruption, Southwest took an aggressive expansion approach in 2021, targeting larger hub airports previously dominated by competitors. The airline expanded its presence in Houston and Chicago, adding Bush Intercontinental Airport and O'Hare International Airport, alongside its existing bases at Hobby and Midway. The move marked Southwest's return to Bush for the first time ever since 2005 and its first ever entry into O'Hare. Southwest also launched service to Miami International Airport, a key American Airlines hub, as well as several Colorado ski destinations and other southern cities, totaling 10 new destinations in 2021. Following the FAA's decision in November 2020 to lift the 737 MAX grounding, Southwest began returning its 34 MAX aircraft to service and retraining its pilots. The airline officially resumed MAX operations on March 11, 2021, becoming the fourth U.S. airline to do so. On June 23, 2021, Gary Kelly announced his retirement, set for February of 2022. Bob Jordan was named as his successor, while Kelly planned to remain as executive chairman of the board until at least 2026. In December of 2022, Southwest Airlines faced an unprecedented scheduling crisis that left thousands of passengers stranded across the country. A severe winter storm initially triggered mass flight cancellations, but while other airlines resumed normal operations within days, Southwest problems spiraled out of control. Between December 21st and 25th, the airline canceled around 25% of its flights, and by December 26th, over half of its scheduled trips were scrapped. The chaos intensified as customers struggled to rebook flights, contact customer service, or even locate their luggage. As frustration mounted, Southwest took drastic measures, including a system-wide reset, that preemptively canceled thousands of flights and halted ticket sales until the end of the month. The airline also suspended unaccompanied minor travel, further complicating holiday plans for families. As the disruptions continued, it became clear that Southwest's issues went beyond the weather. The airline's outdated technology played a critical role in the meltdown. Unlike its competitors, Southwest relied on antiquated scheduling software, SkySolver, and crew web access, which failed under pressure, forcing crew members to call in for assignments. With hold times exceeding 5 hours, pilots and flight attendants were left stranded, unable to reach flights they were scheduled to operate. Some even fell asleep with their phones on hold, waking up the next morning to find they were still waiting. The failure to track and assign crew members efficiently worsened the crisis, leading to cascading cancellations and further stranding both employees and passengers. Southwest's unique point-to-point operating model also made recovery more difficult. While most major airlines use a hub-and-spoke system that allows them to reroute passengers and reposition crews efficiently, Southwest's decentralized approach meant there was little flexibility to recover from disruptions. When flights were canceled, crews and planes were scattered across the network, making it nearly impossible to restore schedules quickly. The crisis exposed how Southwest's rapid growth had outpaced its infrastructure, with CEO Bob Jordan admitting in November 2022 that the company had not kept up with the necessary technological upgrades. The fallout from the crisis was severe. Passengers were left scrambling for alternative travel options, with rental car lines stretching for hours and competing airlines seeing price surges due to increased demand. Meanwhile, Southwest employees found themselves stranded alongside passengers, competing for limited hotel rooms with no assistance from the airline. Public outrage mounted as stories of missed holiday and ruined trips flooded social media. CEO Bob Jordan issued a public apology a full week after the cancellations began, but by then, the damage to the airline's reputation had been done. Financial struggles continued into 2024. Southwest reported a $219 million loss in Q4 of 2023 and a $231 million loss in Q1 of 2024. In response, the airline froze hiring and announced service cuts to Bellingham International Airport, Cozumel International Airport, George Bush Intercontinental Airport, and Syracuse Hancock International Airport. In June of 2024, Elliott Investment Management, an activist hedge fund, disclosed a $1.9 billion stake in Southwest and launched an effort to replace the airline's leadership, arguing that Southwest had failed to evolve. Elliott created a campaign website, StrongerSouthwest.com, and criticized CEO Bob Jordan and Executive Chairman Gary Kelly for the airline's declining stock value and outdated strategies. By September of 2024, Elliott had increased its stake to over 10% of Southwest common stock, giving it the ability to call a special shareholder meeting if its demands were not met. The fund publicly demanded the resignations of both Kelly and Jordan. The day after meeting with Elliott, Southwest announced on September 10, 2024, that 6 board members would step down at the November 21st quarterly board meeting. Additionally, Gary Kelly confirmed he would not seek re-election as executive chairman at the spring 2025 shareholder meeting, while Bob Jordan was expected to remain CEO. In November of 2024, Southwest reached a settlement with Elliott, leading to 5 of Elliott's nominees joining the airline's board, making the largest board takeover in Elliott's history with a U.S. company. As a part of the restructuring, Gary Kelly retired early, and Rakesh Gangwal, co-founder of Indigo and former executive at United Airlines and U.S. Airways, was elevated to chairman of the board. One of Southwest's most defining features has been its open seating policy, which allows passengers to choose their own seats upon boarding rather than receiving assigned ones. While some travelers appreciated the flexibility and the ability to snag a preferred seat based on boarding order, others found the process stressful and chaotic, especially when traveling in groups or with young children. In response to growing customer feedback and the increasing demand for a more structured boarding experience, Southwest announced in early 2024 that it would transition to assigned seating by 2026. The change sparked mixed reactions from the public. Frequent flyers who had mastered Southwest's boarding system and benefited from early check-in were disappointed, while travelers who preferred a guaranteed seat assignment welcomed the shift as a step toward a more traditional and predictable flying experience. Alongside the shift to assigned seating, Southwest revealed plans to introduce premium seating options for the first time in its history. The airline, which has long prided itself on its egalitarian approach with a single class of service, will now offer upgraded seating with extra legroom, priority boarding, and other perks. This move is a significant departure from Southwest's budget-friendly model, signaling a push to compete with major carriers that offer business-class seating. While many travelers saw the change as a positive step toward giving customers more choices, some loyal Southwest fans worried that the airline was losing its identity. Critics expressed concern that this could create a tiered system that prioritizes high-paying customers at the expense of the airline's signature everyman approach, while supporters argued that it was a necessary evolution to keep up with industry trends and customer expectations. Another major policy shift was Southwest's decision to begin offering overnight flights, something the airline had historically avoided. Traditionally, Southwest structured its schedule around daytime operations to simplify logistics and optimize aircraft turnaround times. However, with increasing competition and rising demand for late-night travel, the airline announced it would introduce overnight routes to key markets. This move was largely welcomed by budget-conscious travelers and business flyers looking for more flexibility, as it provided additional travel options at potentially lower fares. However, some passengers expressed concerns about whether Southwest's famously cheerful and engaging crew culture would translate well to overnight flights, where a quieter, more subdued atmosphere is typically preferred. Others question whether the airline's operational improvements would be enough to handle the logistical challenge of red-eye flights after the infamous 2022 meltdown. Overall, Southwest's policy changes reflect a significant departure from the airline's long-standing traditions. While many passengers appreciated the added convenience and flexibility of assigned seating, premium options, and overnight flights, others saw these changes as a loss of what made Southwest unique. In early 2025, Southwest made one of its most controversial decisions yet, ending its long-standing bags fly free policy, a signature feature that had set it apart from competitors. The move, intended to boost revenue and appease investors, was met with immediate and intense backlash from loyal customers and industry analysts alike. For decades, Southwest had marketed itself as the airline that refused to nickel and dime passengers with baggage fees, a stance that contributed to its strong brand loyalty. However, with increasing financial pressure and pressure from Elliott Investment Management to improve profitability, the airline announced that it would begin charging for checked baggage in May of 2025. The reaction was swift and overwhelmingly negative. Passengers took to social media to express their frustrations, with many vowing to switch to other airlines that offer similar pricing but with assigned seating and more extensive route networks. Travel experts criticized the decision, arguing that it could erase one of Southwest's biggest competitive advantages and further alienate customers already frustrated by other recent policy changes, such as the end of open seating. The backlash grew so intense that the industry analysts speculated whether Southwest would be forced to reverse course or at least modify the new policy. Meanwhile, rival airlines, particularly Delta, United, and American, seized the opportunity to attract Southwest customers by promoting their own baggage policies and loyalty programs. So, why has Southwest made so many changes recently? For decades, the airline was known for its simple customer-friendly approach, no change fees, 2 free checked bags, and an open seating policy. But in recent years, Southwest has struggled to stay profitable, leading to some big shifts in how it operates. So what's going on? First, rising operational costs have taken a serious toll. Airlines already operate on razor-thin profit margins, and any increase in expenses can have a major impact on the bottom line. Over the past few years, Southwest has seen significant cost increases in 3 key areas: labor, fuel, and maintenance. Labor costs alone surged by over 17% in the third quarter of 2023, adding an extra $406 million to the airline's expenses. With unions negotiating higher wages and benefits, Southwest has had little choice but to increase pay to retain employees and stay competitive in the job market. At the same time, fuel prices have been unpredictable, sometimes spiking due to global supply chain issues, geopolitical tensions, and inflation. Since fuel is one of the largest expenses for any airlines, these fluctuations make it difficult to plan for long-term profitability. Maintenance costs have also risen as Southwest continues to operate one of the largest all-Boeing 737 fleets in the world. While this fleet strategy has historically helped control costs, keeping older aircraft in service requires more frequent inspections, repairs, and part replacements, all of which add up. These combined expenses have significantly cut into Southwest's ability to turn a profit. Then there's the increased competition. Southwest built its reputation as a low-cost carrier, but today it's facing challenges on multiple fronts. Ultra-low-cost carriers like Spirit and Frontier have entered the market with even cheaper base fares, attracting budget-conscious travelers who are willing to forego perks in exchange for the lower prices. Meanwhile, legacy airlines like Delta, United, and American have fine-tuned their pricing strategies, offering competitive fares while still providing premium services that Southwest doesn't, such as first-class seating and international connections. This puts Southwest in a difficult position. It can't cut prices too much without further hurting profitability, but it also doesn't offer the premium experience that travelers expect. The result? The airline has to find new ways to attract and retain customers without sacrificing too much revenue, which has led to some of the changes we've seen recently. Economic and regulatory challenges have also played a role in Southwest's struggles. Like every airline, Southwest is heavily impacted by broader economic trends. When the economy is strong, people travel more, whether for business or leisure. But when there's uncertainty due to inflation, rising interest rates, or economic downturns, customers tend to cut back on spending, and travel is often one of the first things to go. This unpredictability makes it harder for airlines to plan for demand, leading to fluctuations in revenue. On top of that, Southwest, like all carriers, is facing increasing regulatory pressure, particularly in the area of environmental compliance. Governments worldwide are pushing for airlines to reduce carbon emissions, which means investing in more fuel-efficient aircraft, exploring sustainable aviation fuels, and adjusting flight operations to minimize environmental impact. While these initiatives are important, they come at a cost, and for an airline already struggling to maintain profitability, these added expenses only make things more challenging. Another major factor in Southwest's struggles has been the repeated delays of the Boeing 737 MAX 7. As the largest operator of the 737, Southwest has spent years planning its fleet around Boeing's next-generation aircraft. The airline ordered hundreds of MAX 7s, expecting them to replace the older 700s and provide greater fuel efficiency, lower maintenance costs, and more operational flexibility. But Boeing's ongoing production and certification issues have left Southwest waiting with no clear timeline for when these jets will finally be delivered. This has forced Southwest to keep aging aircraft in service longer than expected, increasing maintenance costs and reducing the efficiency gains that the airline had counted on. It's also impacted growth plans as Southwest has to reconsider its expansion strategy without the newer, more cost-effective aircraft it had originally banked on. The continued uncertainty surrounding the MAX 7 certification has put the airline in a tough spot, making it even harder to control costs and improve profitability. Southwest has built its brand on affordability, flexibility, and customer-friendly policies, but the recent changes signal a major shift in its strategy. From assigned seating to baggage fees and even overnight flights, the airline is moving in a direction that looks a lot more like its competitors. Whether these moves will help Southwest regain its footing or alienate its loyal customers remains to be seen. What do you think? Are these changes an improvement, or is Southwest losing what made it special? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of A Brief History. Thanks for watching this entire series, and I'll see you in the next one.